Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tarek Masoud. I am the Ford Foundation Professor of Democracy and Governance here at the Kennedy School and the Faculty Director of our Middle East Initiative. And it is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to tonight's event, which is the sixth Middle East Dialogue of this year, the 12th in our ongoing series of conversations about the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and how it can be brought to a peaceful end. And our guest tonight is Dr. Micah Goodman. He is one of the State of Israel's premier public intellectuals. He's the author of 7 widely read books that explore everything from classic Jewish thought to the impact of technology on politics to the polarization in Israel over how to address the predicament in which Israelis and Palestinians have found themselves for the better part of a century. And that latter topic is the subject of his 2018 book, Milkud Shishim Vesheva. Look at my Hebrew, it's so amazing. Which is, thank you, hold your applause. I have more tricks up my sleeve, which is translated as Catch 67, The Right, the Left, and the Legacy of the Six-Day War. It was an international bestseller, but more importantly, it's a text that has profoundly shaped the policy debate in Israel, and I would dare say in this country, over the way forward for Israelis and Palestinians. And when I created this series, Micah Goodman was actually one of the first people I tried to get. I really had 2 names in my head from what I would consider, the American right and a centrist Israeli perspective, and that was Jared Kushner and Micah Goodman. It was much easier to land Jared Kushner. Micah wouldn't respond to my emails, and then when we finally met, he said he couldn't leave Israel for a while. So even though it took me a long time to get him here, I'm absolutely thrilled that he is finally here. So many of you have been to these events in the past, so you know the drill. We will talk for about an hour, after which I will then open it up for Q&A. Now, I want to say a few things before we get started. The first is that many of you who know me know that I am basically an Egyptian or even Semitic stereotype, which means I get very animated. And what we're about to do is have what in the Jewish tradition they call an argument for the sake of heaven. So we're going to have some disagreements. I may gesticulate, he may gesticulate, and people who are observing that should understand that the two of us are actually having a great time.
And like each other.
But also talking about some very serious issues which merit emotion and passion. The second thing I will note is that the event is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online. And so if you ask a question, you should just know that you are thereby consenting to have your voice and visage preserved for all eternity and beamed throughout the known universe. And then finally, I want to say something about disruptions. Typically, I'm given a long script about how we will handle disruptions. And I usually say, oh, looking over this audience, it's all full of wonderful people. I don't expect any disruptions. But I just want to emphasize that for us to do the work that is essential at a place like Harvard University, we have to be able to have open dialogue. If you disagree with something I say or with something the speaker says, you will have an opportunity to register that disagreement in the form of a very sharply worded question that will reveal your high intellectual caliber. So I would say reserve your energies for that kind of intervention as opposed to a disruption. With that, please, everybody join me in welcoming Dr. Micah Goodman. Micah, thank you so much for being here.
I'm very glad to be here.
So, Micah, one of the things I've been doing when we have these dialogues with people from Israel or Palestine is I ask them about how they personally are experiencing this moment. And the reason we do this is because it's important to remind everybody that the Israelis and Palestinians that we have the honor to speak to are not just disembodied minds with analyses of the conflict. They're real flesh and blood people who are living it. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked of Tzipi Livni, of Hossein Zomlot, of basically everybody from Israel and Palestine who sat here. How are you and your family coping with this moment?
I hope I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to give not a very personal answer, but it is a personal answer. This war began 50 years exactly after the Yom Kippur War. Actually, 50 years and one day after Yom Kippur War. And shockingly, it follows the pattern of the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War starts with a massive failure of our intelligence community that led to a surprise attack that sent a wave of chaos into the military establishment. The Air Force didn't function in the beginning of the war. Our tank brigade tried to counterattack to push the Egyptian, division.
I wasn't there.
You weren't there. Into Africa, but the counterattack failed. And after nothing was working, there was panic. And famously, Moshe Dayan, our mythological defense minister, holds his head and says, "Churban habayit hashlishi," which means the state of Israel is we're losing it. It didn't happen. The army recovered. The war ended differently. 50 years and one day later, the intelligence community fails massively, much more than Yom Kippur War. The surprise was a greater surprise, and the dysfunctionality of our Air Force, of our soldiers, of everything, the beginning of the war was like Yom Kippur just on steroids. But also the panic was on steroids. In Yom Kippur, Moshe Dayan thought this is the end. This time around, I think we all had that thought this might be the end. Now, you know how when individuals have a near-death experience, that transforms them? What happens when a collective has a near-death experience? It might be transformed. So on an individual level and a collective level, this war has sent into deep reflection. Israel needs to transform. Israel needs to change. We went through a near-death experience. We've seen a lot. We went through a lot. And in a deep way, I think I'm saying this not only as Micah Goodman, but I think as representative of almost every Israeli, we're not the same people we were before October 7th.
Say a little bit more. So how have the Israeli people changed after October 7th in your view?
You know how when an individual goes through an extreme moment, and I became 50 a few months ago.
So did I.
So
2
did
weeks, yeah.
when?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're
I'm recovering. Yes.
recovering.
Yeah.
But being 50 for me, it's a thing. It's a lot of reflection, and I realize the toughest moments of my life, those are the moments where you discover new things about yourself you didn't know about yourself. And I think it's also true about a collective. Extreme moments are opportunities for self-discovery. And Israel as a collective, I think when we're going through this war, oh my God, we're now learning things about ourselves that we didn't know. And I think what I'm sharing now is something that is a narrative that's very common among Israelis in Israel. We discovered not one, but two things. One, that the systems that are governing Israel, the intelligence community, the different branches of the government, suddenly we see how dysfunctional they were and sometimes still are, lazy, slow, and sometimes corrupt. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we're seeing bravery, altruism on the highest levels in a way that's shocking us. We saw bravery on October 7th. We saw NGOs being formed. We're seeing volunteers. And then the hostages are coming back home. And we learned that Agam Berger tried to practice Pesach when she was in Hamas, in the tunnels. And that Emily Damari asked to stay behind with Keith so he won't be alone, not to be liberated. And that Liri Elbag, when she was told that she's going home, but she has to leave Agam Berger behind, she asked Hamas to stay. So we're witnessing on many, many levels human greatness, the best of humanity. Eli Sharabi, a brother of ours that was in Hamas, that was a hostage, he came home and he described in a famous interview to Ilana Dayan that one day Hamas literally, for no reason, broke his bones, just beat the crap out of him. And then they gave him, but literally broke his bones. So they gave him an aspirin so he gets through the night. The next night, he asked for another aspirin. Hamas says, you're on your own. Alon Ohel, which was with him in the, cell 50 meters under the ground, had an aspirin. He somehow smuggled a few weeks. He gave him his aspirin. So we're noticing what we're seeing is the worst and we're seeing the best. And when it comes to Israel, we're seeing how dysfunctional the systems are and lazy and sometimes corrupt. Now, spirited, patriotic, altruistic, expressing human greatness, we see on the grassroots level. So Israelis today, I think we realize when we see the two, we see what we call Israel shel Mala, the Israel from the top, and Israel shel Mata, the Israel from the bottom. Now, obviously, not everything is amazing in the bottom, not everything is horrible on the top, but in broad, but that's what we're seeing, that's what we're experiencing. And this is a moment because after the Yom Kippur War, Israel was transformed. Israel changed. Israel had the episode between 48 and 77 governed by Mapai, the Ben Gurion Israel, which was socialist, it was secular, it was Ashkenazi, European. And then 77, Israel changed and becomes not socialist, but capitalist, not secular, but traditional, not European, but more diverse. The nature of Israel changed. Ben Gurion Israel turned into Begin's Israel. And if we borrow an idea from the French, the French, every time France changes, they say, okay, now we're not the Fourth Republic, we're the Fifth Republic. So I think Israel so far, we have two Israeli republics. The first republic from 48 to 77, the second Israeli republic from 77 till today. But the moment that put the end to the first Israeli republic, Ben Gurion's Israel, and gave birth to Likud Israel was what the second Israeli republic was the Yom Kippur War.
Yeah.
It seems like now that we're reliving Yom Kippur War on steroids, are we going to relive the birth of Israel out of this moment? Now, I believe it's very possible that October 7th war is putting an end to Likud Israel, to the second Israeli Republic, and it might give birth to the third Israeli Republic. And what we're realizing, the third Israeli Republic has to represent the greatness we see on the grassroots level and not the laziness and corruption that actually brought us to October 7th and is putting an end to the second Israeli Republic.
Dr. Goodman, I think that's a really arresting way to describe some of the transformations that are happening in Israeli society. You're absolutely right that we've seen in the conduct of some of the hostages some of the best of humanity. We've also seen since October 7th, according to statistics that most people find reliable, not including most of my Israeli interlocutors, more than 40,000 dead Palestinians, Gaza completely laid to waste, a serious humanitarian crisis. So when you look at that, what do you think? Do you think, yeah, we're winning?
Is this a question about the ethics of war or the ethics of are we winning?
It's a question about what you see, so I asked.
Okay, so I'm interested in discussing the ethics of war and the whole Gaza and 40,000.
We can talk about both.
Yeah, broad, but I think if we look at are we winning? So there's two stories of this war. On the one hand, there's the Israeli-Palestinian war. On the other hand, there's the Israeli-Iran war. There's two wars happening. They're connected, but like there's two wars. The Israeli-Iran war, Qasem Soleimani tried to build an axis of proxies, what they call the axis of resistance, surround Israel, and then in one moment activate it all, destroy Israel. But what happened in this war, while they were in the process and the attempt to destroy Israel, they were destroyed during that process. Hezbollah's missile arsenal shrunk to like 20% of its original size. Its leadership was destroyed. We have a new government in Lebanon, which is amazing. Syria wouldn't have happened with that. I mean, I know there might be new problems, but the Syria wouldn't happen. Iraqi proxies now want to be more affiliated with Iraq and less with Iran. So actually, we could say that in the north, there's a massive, versus Iran, there's a victory. Versus Hamas, it's there's no victory. It's ambivalent. So I think those are the two images we should think. Versus Iran, we're winning. Versus Hamas, it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah. So, but what about the question? I think my question really was more about the ethics of war. That, in other words, I mean, you talk about post-October 7th very movingly and convincingly as providing opportunities for us to witness some human greatness. And I'm not disputing that, but we're also seeing some of the worst humanity in the massive death toll. And does that not give you pause?
We're in a tragedy. We're in an incredible tragedy. And I want to explain like this death, like the situation. There is an Israeli military theorist called Guy Chazut. The Israelis can look him up. He wrote a book, Tzva High-Tech, Tzva Parashim, Kalaidiko. And he describes the biography of, he said from the very beginning, let's face it and tell the truth. The Middle East didn't want the Jews to have a state in this region. Tried to reject it. And there were three different evolving strategies to reject the presence of a Jewish state in the Middle East. A Western country, there's different versions to this. The first attempt was to build strong standing armies to attack Israeli army and hopefully to win. That was 48, that was 56 with you guys, that was...
Yeah, I mean, 56 was you.
It was us.
You
It was,
could, yeah.
It was us.
56 was you. 67 was you.
I think 67. I think 67 was you. I mean, you violate. Okay, we can argue. But okay,
Neither of us was around. Yeah.
But anyway, we had standing armies. We're standing armies in 48, 56, 67, and 73, and all the attempts to end the Zionist project in the Middle East failed. Strategy number two was terrorism. Terrorism, very efficient. You kill civilians and then hide among civilians. You kill Israelis where they can't protect themselves because they're civilians, and then you hide among civilians where they can't. Okay. And it's creating guerrilla, small squads attacking. That didn't work. Second Intifada ended, I think, with an Israeli victory. And then we moved Qasem Soleimani, Iran's great idea of the third strategy was taking the first two strategies and combining them. Not an army, not terrorism, but an army of terrorists. That's what Hezbollah had. That's what Hamas had. Now, real army, real heavy infantry divisions, well-trained with a, command, everything, but acting like terrorists in the sense that they're attacking civilians and then hiding beneath civilians. So we have an innovative idea where instead of an army protecting civilians, we have an army protected by civilians. Now, this strategy is designed to create a tragedy because now I want to think this also on a strategic level, but also on an ethical level. But there's just tragedy is the following. Imagine from an Israeli perspective, and by the way, I'm aware that everything I'm sharing with you is as an Israeli, from an Israeli-centric point of view. So Palestinians, I'm not trying to convince, I'm trying maybe to help you understand the Israeli mainstream point of view. So let's say the war is a car and the destination is victory, and victory is there's a victory versus Iran, and we're focusing Hamas, dismantling Hamas. Okay. But to get there, the oil tank, by the way, I have an American accent, but I think in Hebrew. Okay, so the oil tank is international legitimacy. And if we run out of legitimacy before we make it to our destination, we lost the war. So what's going to happen first? Are we going to destroy Hamas before we run out of legitimacy? Or we run out of legitimacy before we destroy Hamas? So Hamas' strategy is the following. We do October 7th, we kill their civilians. We hide beneath our civilians. And then while they try to destroy Hamas by doing all the damage to civilians on the way, cutting through civilians to get to the tunnels, they're eroding their legitimacy, and hopefully they'll run out of legitimacy while Hamas is still standing. That's a strategy. And the meaning of the strategy is that the incentive system, I'm not talking about morality, I'm talking about egoistic incentives of Israel is to minimize the amount of civilian Palestinian casualties, and Hamas's incentive is to maximize them. So this is a tragedy designed by Hamas by creating not an army that protects civilians, but an army that's protected by civilians, an army of terrorism. Now, from an ethical point of view, this presents Israel not with a binary ethical dilemma, but with a tragic ethical dilemma. A binary dilemma is when you have two options, one is good, the other is bad. You have to have the courage to choose the good over the bad. A tragic dilemma is we have a bad option and then a bad option. And we chose a bad option. When we decided to destroy Hamas, that was a bad option. But don't judge me, we chose bad over good. We chose bad over bad. Now, you might argue with me. The bad that you chose, the evil that you chose is worse than, and I can argue that it's not. But we were presented with not a binary dilemma, but a tragic dilemma. And from an Israeli point of view, if Hamas gets to October 7th here, and then it has immunity because it's hiding beneath civilians, if you could be massacred and then you can't protect yourself, if Israel is a country that can't protect itself, Israel can't exist. People won't want to live in Israel. Foreign investment will come to Israel. Israel can't exist. So we chose life. We chose life. That's a broad Israeli consensus. We chose life. And I want to say one last thing. You know, many times when people use civilians as to protect themselves, you know, as shields. So let's say in Entebbe, I think some of the civilians died because of our soldiers' bullets. I think it's fair to say they were murdered by the terrorists. Because you see, there's unethical offense is to attack civilians. Unethical defense is to hide among civilians. So it's true that 40,000 Palestinians died. It's a tragedy. Hamas created the tragedy. And I think it's fair to say that it was Israeli bombs, but they were murdered by Hamas.
There's a lot of people who say you might be right that, you know, absolutely your moral evaluation of Hamas is one that nobody could question, but it's a reality with which we have to deal.
Tragedy.
And, you know, the fact of the matter is that some people will tell you that the fact of the matter is that Israel could have brought an end to this conflict. You know, you've not just bloodied Hamas's nose, you've amputated their legs, and they have gotten to the point where they've cried uncle, and to stop the war, we'll give you back the hostages. And from the standpoint of Israel, that is insufficient because, as you said, Hamas needs to be destroyed. Could you say, why does Hamas need to be destroyed? Why can't you be satisfied with having crippled them as dramatically as they've been crippled?
Well, for two reasons.
Yeah.
One, a war shapes a story, and the story is told for years, for decades.
Yeah.
And we need the story to be that after you October 7th us, you don't exist anymore. And we can't have this peak up. That's one. Now, two, from a Muslim perspective, a Middle Eastern perspective, there is Islamist theology is about that victory is reassured, victory is guaranteed. I'm quoting now for the Israeli Sagi Pulka, an important Israeli, you know, Sagi Pulka is, an important student of Islamism.
Okay.
And according to, like, victory will come. But so in the long term, there's victory. And to get there, you need sabir. Am I saying it correctly?
Patience, yeah.
Sabir, patience. And the Quran said God stands with the people that have sabir.
Okay.
That have patience. And because victory is guaranteed, every time I survive a battle and I'm still standing, I'm still participating in the process that leads to victory. And that's why Hamas will declare a victory. It'll be credible in the concepts of many of his followers. They will accept it. They won. The October 7th us, and they won. The only way for them to accept the fact that they were defeated, like Japan and Germany in World War, to accept the fact they were defeated, is if, as an organization, as an army, they don't exist at the end. Israel, so it's a existential need for us, for the narrative to be that Hamas lost.
Because your view is that Hamas is so committed to killing Jews and to ending the state of Israel that them surviving in any way, shape, or form,
they'll come out of the rebels, do like this, and they won, and they'll cheer, and we did it, and like they
said, they won't change because they're so ideologically committed to killing Jews.
No, they're ideologically committed to healing the world the way they see it.
Right, which means getting rid of this the wound that to them is the state of Israel.
I think in a broad sense, the Islamist ideology, like Sayyid Qutb and you know, the founders of Islamism, is that Islamism was distorted It turns into like a Protestant religion where it shrinks to the size of a mosque. It's not governing a country. That's how many Muslims start understanding Islam. The reason why Islamism was distorted was because Western civilization contaminated it. And according to Muslim brother theologians, the people that pushed the West to distort Islam behind the West are the Jews. Okay? And the vehicle that pushes the West to contaminate Islam is Israel. So actually, we have to protect, this is the Islamist view, Islam from the West. To do that, we have to destroy Israel. And See, this is a very powerful ideology, a very powerful ideology. Ever since 1996, this ideology, which was destabilizing every Arab country, destabilizing, finally had a country that starts supporting it. I'm talking about Qatar.
Oh, okay.
Qatar, that supports this ideology using a most powerful vehicle possible, Al Jazeera.
Yeah.
And hosting the theologian that happened to me also before, hosting the
Warned me.
hosting the legislators of Sharia that say that, you know, jihad against Israel is a effective act, it's a commandment that needs to be activated. Theologians like Yusuf al-Qaradawi saying that jihad is not legitimate against any country in the world in the West besides Israel. So this Islamist ideology was destabilizing government, found a very powerful government that's pushing it, and we're attacked by this axis of Qatar's soft power, Iran's hard power. Iran's hard power armed Hamas, soft power built the narrative of Hamas, and that's what attacked us on October 7th.
A very deft description of Islamist ideology and some of the, forces supporting it. And how long have we known that these are the ideas of a group like Hamas? Did we just discover this?
Well, these ideas were invented in 1928.
Right. Long time.
Now, 1928. Now,
let's not go back to 1928.
No,
stipulate.
I'll tell you why it's important. 1928.
Briefly, yeah.
Because 1948, when these ideas started to be created, that was before the occupation of 67, the Nakba of 40. It's before Israel existed, and I don't think it happened because of some kibbutzim and Charod.
Right.
Okay, so Islamism is like 1928. It was actually a reaction to the failure of World War I.
Yeah.
While Mustafa Kemal was saying we lost because we were too Muslim, Hassan Razana says, yes, we lost because we weren't Muslim enough. And that's when the ideas start.
Yeah.
And they were in the periphery of the Muslim world.
Yeah.
Because at the time, the idea was Arab nationalism and socialism.
Yes.
But after the Arabs were defeated in the Six-Day War, the paradigm was that secular nationalism was defeated and Islamism comes back, and then it gets Qatar to promote it.
Well, you've described this very convincingly. I guess but you've left out a piece, at least as it relates to Hamas, which is that it wasn't just Qatar that was supporting Hamas; it was your prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And so, Micah Goodman and Tarek Masoud both knew that Hamas were inveterate anti-Semites who are motivated by an ideology that will not be satisfied until Israel is eliminated and until Islam rules the world. You and I both knew that, but your prime minister didn't know that, apparently, and was channeling money to Hamas. And so I guess the question comes back to the way Israel conducts the war, okay? On the eve of October 7th, the summer before October 7th, there were protests in Gaza against Hamas because of Hamas's mismanagement. And I often think how much earlier those protests would have come and how much bigger they would have been if your prime minister had not been relaxing Hamas's budget constraint. And so then, what do you say to somebody who says to you, sorry, you guys, as a result, after you fund Hamas, you don't get to go and carpet bomb Gazan civilians when Hamas acts exactly the way you and I knew they would always act. What's your response?
Am I not supposed to be the to explain Bibi Netanyahu?
I'm just trying to get you to, as somebody with a sophisticated moral sense. You're saying that we have to fight the war this way because Hamas hides under civilian. Your government funded Hamas.
Yep.
So you don't get to fight the war that.
So I don't want to be now like I'm not representing Bibi Netanyahu and definitely not his government. Okay, but Bibi's paradigm was that we have to keep the eye on the ball, and the ball is Iran.
Yeah,
I think Bibi didn't understand that the ball is also Qatar. There's soft power and there's hard power. The capital of hard power directed against Israel is in Tehran. The capital of soft power directed against Israel is in Doha. People don't see that. People don't say that. You can't win a war if you can't defeat an enemy if you can't name your enemy. And we have soft power directed against Qatar, hard power from Iran. Those are the two big enemies.
Qatar couldn't get a penny to Hamas.
Exactly. Now, and Bibi Netanyahu, he has a few blind spots. One of them was cozying up to Qatar in order to keeping Gaza quiet, to keep our focus on Iran. That was, Bibi has, I think, 6 or 7 massive mistakes that led to October 7th.
Yeah.
This is one of them.
I think describing it as a blind spot, somebody might say, is giving Benjamin Netanyahu a little bit of a pass. You know, we know that he told the Likud Party conference, for example, that if you want to avoid a Palestinian state, then you have to be in favor of supporting and funding Hamas. So it wasn't just a blind spot. It wasn't him just trying to keep the Gaza Strip quiet. It was something engineered by him.
Again, please don't push me to a place
Yeah.
where I have to now represent Bibi Netanyahu. But I just want to say, but I do understand how he made that mistake.
But I'm just saying it should shape our moral evaluation of Israel's conduct of the war. That's what
But no one in Israel thought that right now that you're building Hamas. It was an attempt to keep the Gazans quiet. It was a massive mistake. We need to discuss Jabotinsky about like the thoughts. Maybe we're going to go into
the founder of revisionist Zionism.
Yes, in 1923, Zev Jabotinsky writes a very important prophetic piece called Al Kir HaBarzel, Iron Wall, and where he says that people that think that if Israel comes to this region and makes life better for the local people, so we'll accept Zionism and we won't rebel against Zionism. And what Jabotinsky says of the mistake is that it's possible to bribe individuals, but it's impossible to bribe collectives. And that was Jabotinsky's powerful insight. And that's why he saw that there's going to be a clash between these two national movements. And in the sense that you take money from Qatar to calm people down so it won't explode on you, that is Netanyahu, maybe the paradox of Netanyahu, that the Likud is a party which is the continuation of the heritage of Jabotinsky turned against the fundamental idea of Zev Jabotinsky himself.
So you know, that's an interesting point, but you're kind of eliding the, you know, the argument I'm trying to make to you. So it's much simpler than how you're making it out to be. I mean, am I getting it wrong? Did Netanyahu not say, we've got to fund these guys because we want to keep the Palestinian camp divided? So he played with this particular fire. And I'm not saying that that means that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself after October 7th, but it means that the way Israel defends itself, it has to be much more sensitive to civilian casualties. You don't get to say, oh, it's a tragedy, but Hamas hides underground. We always knew Hamas hid underground. You shouldn't have funded them.
Well, I think we're going to think about what Hamas did to us. You know how an individual, Palestinian individual, could sometimes put a bomb, do it, and commit suicide, saying that Jewish death or Israeli death is more important than my life. October 7th is what happens when a collective does that. When as a collective, you're a suicide bomb. As a collective, you realize, now October 7th is not a moment. It's not a moment. It's not just one day.
October 7th wasn't committed by the collectivity of Gazans.
Well, not the collectivity of Gazans, but it's a project. You see, if for 17 years you're getting international support to build something nice, something great, and instead of investing the money in Gaza and building Gaza from the top, you're investing in the underground of Gaza.
You and I both agree. Hamas are terrible human beings.
So what is that? You're investing the money instead of in our life, but in Israelis' death. And that's why Israel has if the tragedy is that we have to choose between two bad options. The bad option means that we get to have a state, and we can discuss, is it moral that Jews have a state? Maybe, no. but if it's essential morally that Jews have a state, so we chose the bad option. We didn't choose it over anything good. We chose it over something that's worse.
So I mean, you've spoken very eloquently and convincingly about the logic of why Israel needs to conduct the war in the way that it's doing, et cetera, and the bad options that it's facing. In the international community, you spoke about the gas tank of legitimacy and how it may be running out. Internationally, we see even here in the United States, a lot of people with a great deal of misgivings about Israel's conduct of the war, and people calling it genocidal, that this is a genocide that's happening against Gazans. When you hear people say that, what do you think? Do you think that they're misled? Do you think they're anti-Semites? What is driving the increasing view of this conflict, of Israel's conduct of this conflict as genocidal?
The platform of Hamas is genocidal. platform.
We're not disagreeing about that.
And October 7th was a flavor of what genocide really is.
Okay.
And this war is to prevent genocide. And we discussed a tragedy designed strategically by Hamas. Why do they say that? Because it's effective. It's effective.
It's not just Hamas saying that.
Oh, I know. It's effective. Now, because, listen, there is... Would you say it's fair to say that if a country doesn't have the right to defend itself, it's close to saying it doesn't have the right to exist, right?
Yeah, I would say that, yes.
You'd say that, right? So by neutralizing our ability to defend ourselves in face of this tragedy, we're not fighting an army above the ground, our army that's protecting civilians. We're fighting an army protected by civilians. That tragedy is designed by Hamas. So if we can't do that, we can't have the right to protect ourselves. We can't have the right to protect ourselves. It's close to saying we don't have the right to exist. And to say that
But the people who are saying ceasefire now, particularly at this point, Israel's protected. Hamas cannot constitute a threat to you right now. And, the way that October 7th happened, and you said it yourself, involved massive failures on the part of the Israelis.
100%.
It actually didn't have to happen. Israel was protected. It should have been protected. And now Israel's woken up. You said there's a transformation, we realize. So the odds to me of another October 7th happening are vanishingly small. So the self-defense has been achieved. Somebody might say, now you don't have the right to go and continue to the point of obliterating your enemy, because that's going to involve obliterating thousands or tens of thousands more innocent souls. And I want to know why you don't see the validity in that argument.
I'll tell you what I do see. Personally, I think Israel should end the war now.
Yeah. Okay.
But the reason why I think we should end the war is we have to bring our brothers back home. By the way, I say our brothers is because the 24 people that are alive, they're our brothers. But we also have 59 people, many of them not alive, and those are brothers and our sisters. And we have to bring them back home. But after saying that, can I call you Tarek?
Yeah, of course.
So call me Micah, okay? Well, we have the whole Dr. Goodman thing. The fact I think that we should end the war now, bring in the hostages, is because I think we should prioritize Iran now. There's an Iran moment. And I do think that in the books of history, the narrative has to be that in the end, Hamas was dismantled. Just like the Israeli left got it wrong in the 80s when it says peace now. The only peace that's possible is not the peace that comes now. I think as an Israeli, the right is getting it wrong when they say victory now. The only victory that's possible is not the victory that comes now.
So when you say this is the Iran moment, meaning what? Do you want to have a hot war with Iran?
First, I just want to know, there's a moment. There is a moment. You want to go into this?
Yeah, let's go into it a little bit, and then I want to get into your views on your book. And
okay, so very briefly, Iran is the Islamic Republic, not Iran.
Yeah.
Yes, have
the mullahs.
The Islamic Republic, the regime, which it's the enemy of the Iranian people, just like it's the enemy of the Israeli people. The Islamic Republic is under serious problems. 7 years of double-digit inflation. What does that do to society? High levels of unemployment, energy crisis. This winter, for hours, they were stuck without energy in the cold in Isfahan and different places. The air is contaminated. There's no water in the faucet many times. That's an internal crisis. You add to that, right when they had an internal crisis, there's a regional crisis. They lost their proxies. Now think about that. For years, taxpayers' money of Iran was invested in Hezbollah. And then the Israeli Air Force takes Hezbollah and shrinks it 20. All taxpayers' money just goes down the drain. Protesters in Iran for years were saying, na Gaza, na Lebanon, Janam Fadaye Iran. If there's Persian speakers here, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce it correctly. Now, na Gaza, we don't want our money going to Gaza. Na Lebanon, not to Lebanon. Our loyalty, our heart is with Iran. It's what you Americans would call Iran first, and not investing in all these proxies. So think about it. Right the moment where they're in an internal crisis, they're in a regional crisis. We're the weakest internally, they're humiliated regionally, and then the third crisis comes, Trump appears and resumes maximum pressure. The sum of these three crises could lead to an historic moment in Iran. And personally, I think that if we had a Churchill leading Israel, this is what he would have done. And I still hope a Churchill would appear. Bibi always thinks he's Churchill. Now is the test. Churchill in World War II understood he has one strategy: to bring in America to defeat the Nazis. And he realized that sometimes you have to pay a price to bring in America to defeat the Nazis. And Churchill, the progressives don't like him today because they're judging him by today's values, but he was an imperialist and he liked the colonies. He liked having India. He liked the colonies. But to bring in Roosevelt, he was willing to adopt the rhetoric of, which in the end led to the shrinkage of the empire, giving up the colonies. But he was willing to do that to defeat. It's like, you know, when you play chess, the best move, the most sophisticated chess players are willing to sacrifice the queen. She was the British pioneer, to sacrifice the queen in order to win the game. Now, that's what Churchill did. Israel has, when it comes to Iran, we have one strategy: to try to bring in America. Trump wants a deal. He wants a victory. He wants some. What if Israel goes to Trump? You get your deal. The mythological October 7th ends. You ended it. Hostages come home. Hostility is over. Now let's focus on Iran. Can we pull that off? I think that's the moment for now. So I personally think we have to end the war. We have to prioritize right now Iran, bring our brothers home, unite the Israeli people, end that war, do Iran. But remember that Hamas, in the long run, can't govern Gaza. That should be our next project when the moment comes.
So there's a lot of threads to pull on here, and I want to get to your book. And so I'm probably going to leave some of these threads, but I suspect that somebody might respond to your, attempt to sell Donald Trump on the idea of bombing Iran or getting into a war with Iran by saying, look, actually the Americans can get both a deal with Iran and they can get October 7th to end tomorrow, because Israel can't continue to conduct this war without American support. So, you know, when Trump was sitting with Vladimir Zelensky and he said, you have no cards, I think he would probably say something like that to Bibi. But I want to...
I think great if the true statesmanship might be able to try to to make a massive move here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot to talk about there, but I want to get to some of the deeper issues with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I want to talk about your book, Catch 67, which, you know, I've read very closely, learned an enormous amount. Can you describe for everybody what the catch is?
Again, it's from an Israeli point of view, from an Israeli-centric point of view.
Yeah.
The catch is like this. The territories to the east of the Green Line, if you have like an image of the map of Israel, roughly, Israel is a weird country, in many ways.
Geographically.
But also geographically. Within the Green Line, Israel is wide in the north. I mean, relatively, it's not like, wide in the north, wide in the south, but very narrow in its center. That's fact number one. Fact number two, where do most Israelis live? In the center. So where Israel is most narrow, that's where most Israelis live. Now, Ben Gurion had a different vision for Israel. We should spread out, go to the Negev. But Israelis were like, yeah, we want to be all claustrophobic. When you fly over, when you go to Israel, you fly over Tel Aviv. That's not Tel Aviv. That's Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, Givata. It's just one. It's the largest concentration of Jews in the world. So that's fact number two. Where Israel is most narrow, that's where most people are. And fact number three, that area is also topographically very much lower than the mountains of Samaria. Mm-hmm. So you put those three facts together, and this led Abba Evan, let's say, to say that the boundary of the Green Line, as he calls it, the Auschwitz borders, it's unprotectable borders. Now, in 1967, Israel actually beat three armies, including the Egyptian army, from those borders.
Yep.
That's true. But imagine the following scenario. What would happen if, but Israel, well, now I'm giving you points. Israel started that war.
Yes.
I mean, it was our surprise attack. It was our initiative. But what would have happened if Israel, listen to this question, if Israel had been surprised like it was in 73 in the borders that it had in 67? So let's play this out. In 73, Syria, Egypt managed to conquer, let's say, 10, 15, 20 kilometers in the Golan Heights and Sinai. But what if they manage to surprise us from the borders at 67? So by they conquer 15 kilometers, where are they? In the Mediterranean. So this is what led to the idea of undefendable borders. But you could say, okay, that idea is anachronistic. Standing armies don't really exist anymore. It's something else. So now it takes me to like an interesting thought of Henry Kissinger. The reaction, because that is the old right used to say, we'll be surprised from the 67 border. But here's maybe an updated version of that anxiety. The updated version is that what are the chances that if we'll have a independent Palestinian state in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, choose your words, what if there's an independent Palestinian there, what are the chances that it will be a failed state? That there'll be a vacuum of governance there. And now that vacuum, so all the chaos forces of the Middle East will enter that vacuum, including, the Iran proc. Because what Iran does, wherever there's a crack in sovereignty, that's where they exist. So we'll have Iran proxies and other forces, chaotic forces of the Middle East, which means the old right used to say that a strong Palestinian state will threaten Israel. The new right says a weak Palestinian state will threaten Israel. I find these arguments very compelling, very convincing, and not only me, most Israelis, especially after October 7th. In 2005, Israel leaves the Gaza Strip, and all 50,000 Israelis living in the envelope of the Gaza Strip, their life becomes a nightmare before October 7th. If there's average a missile a month, your life experiences, you don't know what day of the month, so it's as far as you're concerned all the time. There's 50,000 Israelis living in the envelope of the Gaza Strip. There's 5 million Israelis living in the envelope of the West Bank.
Yeah.
Okay, so for all these reasons, if we leave the West Bank, we are threatening Israel. What happens if we stay in the West Bank? There's 2.5, well, it depends how you count, but there's millions of Palestinians leaving the West Bank. And if we control their lives, eventually they'll be absorbed into Israel, become citizens of Israel, and the state of Israel as a Jewish state depends on a Jewish state's a democracy. It depends on numbers. It depends, and this is what Zionists understood, including Jabotinsky from the very beginning. It depends on the notion that Jews have a massive majority. So if we stay in the West Bank, we're risking a majority that might being an end to Israel. That's an existential risk. If we leave the West Bank, we're risking our security. That's the catch. That's the catch. And from an historic point of view, Zionism is a very pragmatic movement. The founding fathers, there's many Zionisms, but the way I see the founding fathers of Zionism, it's learning two lessons from Jewish history. When we were living in communities without the ability to protect ourselves, every now and then there were pogroms and there was nothing we can do about it. They had two strategies. One, to hope that the governments, the Gentiles, will protect us from the mob. That didn't always work. Second strategy was hoping that God will protect us. That also didn't always work. So the two G's, it didn't.
Goy and God.
The Goy and God.
Yeah.
That it didn't always work. Zionism is okay. The only people that could protect the Jewish people are the Jews themselves. That's Zionism. We're not asking, not God and not anyone else. Now, what's our position? The left says, if you leave the West Bank, the international community will guarantee your security. Okay, that's back to diaspora mentality. The Goy will protect us. Some of the settler movements say, if we stay in the West Bank, we're fulfilling these ancient prophecies. God wants us to be here and doesn't make any demographic sense. Well, it's okay. God will protect you. But if you learned the double lesson from Jewish history, and I can't trust God when it comes to national security, I can't trust England that's not Jewish when it comes to my national security, I'm in a catch. If I stay in the West Bank, I'm risking my majority. If I leave Judea and Samaria, I'm risking my security.
Let me pull on both of these. Let me pull first on the security supposition that you're making, and you kind of preempted some of what I was going to say. But this, typically, yes, when you hear Israelis talk about the need to maintain the presence in the West Bank, they're envisioning, some standing army coming and attacking them. And my response to that is twofold. First of all, when there was a standing army that could do it in 1967, Israel won. Okay. And number two, those things don't exist anymore anyways. I mean, that's not the way they fight. So you're really looking at the threat of terrorism from the West Bank. And, that does seem to me, eminently tractable problem that doesn't require you to stay in the West Bank. I mean, you make it sound like the highlands of the West Bank are this strategic asset. Terrorists don't attack from the highlands. Terrorists are going to penetrate your country, and they'll do that whether the border is in the West Bank or whether the border is Jordan. And if you take your logic to its conclusion, there isn't any border that with an Arab state that will allow you to feel secure.
Okay, so there's something very big we learned from 2005. And by the way, back in 2005, I supported this engagement.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
I won't go explain myself, but I thought it was a good idea back then. I wrote about it.
Disengagement from Gaza. Yeah.
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 But there's something that we've learned. We said we could leave Gaza and still be protected from Gaza. Now, if we try to really bring this down to detail, it looks like this. When we were present militarily in Gaza, so when the military has presence, it's easy to build a network of human intelligence sources. When your military leaves, the human resources start to evaporate. And then you have to tell yourself a story. We still know what's going on because we have technology. And that's the paradigm that Israel was addicted to. The paradigm that technology compensates for territory.
It wasn't wrong.
Well, here's the tragedy. This is something we're learning in the past few months. It's only coming out now.
Okay.
Machine bits are now investigating themselves because we don't have a committee to investigate like a larger, it's an Israeli debate. So we're investigating. So what we're saying is that, 4,800 terrorists attacked us and there wasn't enough people there to send a WhatsApp to someone on the machine bit on the other side. We were in the dark, but we thought we were in the light. We thought that through technology, we can compensate for not having human sources. So this is something very, very big that we've learned, that maybe technology does not compensate for territory. And I don't think Israelis will be willing to take the risk of doing that in the West Bank, where to tell ourselves our story that without being military presence, through technology, we're still protected. That is what Israelis call a conceptia, a concept, an idea that collapsed on October 7th. This is one of the ideas that collapsed on October 7th. Now, I hope we'll go into what can we do in the territories, but the idea of a military withdrawal from the West Bank and hoping that technologically we'll be able to know what's happening on the other side after that failed in Gaza, we're not going to repeat that in the West Bank, where Israel is most narrow and the largest concentration of the Jews are there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of points to make here. I mean, what do you say to somebody who says, first of all, no, the Israelis actually did have intelligence that that Hamas was planning something, and they had fairly granular intelligence. It was just ignored. I mean, there's the story of that Israeli intelligence analyst who raised the alarms and she wasn't listened to.
Yeah.
But the other point that somebody could make is that, you're kind of learning the wrong lesson from October 7th. Why isn't the lesson to learn from October 7th that, when we withdraw from Arab land, from Palestinian land, it's a good idea not to fund the religious fundamentalists? Why isn't that the lesson? And there's an alternative. I'm trying to make the point to you that there's an alternative history here.
Israel made a massive mistake, but do you think that if Israel wouldn't have moved $30,000 in cash from Qatar into Gaza? So I think now I might getting by the way, the facts wrong here.
Okay.
Because
that never stopped me. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I'm quoting now Israeli and like a website. Nothing I checked, but Hamas persuaded Iran to hand over $500 million. For what, by the way? Our enemies really believe that Israel is on the verge of being destroyed. Ahmed Yassin has a prophecy that by
founder of Hamas.
Yeah, by 2027, Israel is gone. By the way, there's other prophecies that by 2022 we're gone. This messianic fervor that Israel is about to be destroyed, and the destruction of Israel, according to a hadith that wasn't very important, that the end of days comes when Muslims manage to kill Jews and there'll be a rock and a tree telling the Muslim that there's a Jew behind me. Now that hadith is not very, I mean, I know from Jewish tradition, there's stories. You have thousands of stories and you choose which ones to make dominant. Hamas chose that one. And so, so if it wasn't Qatari's $30,000, it's Iran's. I wouldn't say, this is, let's not, I mean, I think we made big mistakes, but the motivation and the capability when they were married not by Bibi Netanyahu.
What about, okay, so I get your point. What about the messianists on your side, though? I mean, you have a government right now that has Bezalel Smotrich in it, that has Ben Ghafir. I mean, these are people who are every bit as messianic as the Muslims you're identifying. Why isn't that also part of the problem? That
Listen, it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem. I'll tell you, if I, now there's many things to say about this.
It's a serious problem. We can't solve it. Consequently, we need to keep occupying the Palestinians.
Well,
as opposed to offering them a genuine peace deal, withdrawing our settlers from the West Bank, stopping our humiliation of them.
I'll tell you my problem with different messianic versions is. And by the way, messianic thinking is not only religious thinking, there's also secular thinking that's messianic thinking. That's called utopian thinking.
Yes.
And my take is that utopian thinking is an infantile way of thinking, an abstraction of infantile way of thinking. What does a child want? There's a problem. Daddy, make the problem go away. And when you mature, you're like, okay, problems are not going away, therefore I have to deal with them. What is a utopian way of political thinking? Let's make the problem go away. Now, in Israel, and again, from an Israeli perspective, the left, that's left, but also in the world, is like, maybe peace is possible. Like if I'm sitting now in Nir Oz, a kibbutz butchered in October 7th, and you look at the fence, on the other fence, there's 2 million Palestinians. So people are selling you two fantasies. The left is selling you a fantasy, it's possible to end that hostility. They won't hit you anymore. If we'll just give them a state, they won't hit you anymore. The right, the far right, and now Donald Trump is weaponizing that, selling you a different fantasy. Not that the hostility won't be there anymore, but that's
Palestinians.
Just the Palestinians won't be there anymore. Now,
Netanyahu loves that idea.
Yeah, it serves certain purposes for him. Now, but if I want to be like harsh and pragmatic, I recognize I'm in a tragedy, and the tragedy is the following. Palestinians are here to stay. The hostility is here to stay. The other side of the fence, there's always going to be 2 million Palestinians. And for the foreseeable future, they're not going to like me. And now what do you do? My problem with fantasies, messianic fantasies or utopian fantasies, is that they neutralize your ability to face hard problems and deal with them. You know that great book, From Good to Great?
Yeah, I've heard of it, haven't read it.
Yeah, I also haven't read it. I can quote it. And he says, like, what makes companies great?
Yeah.
And he has like, I forget, like he has a list.
Yeah.
One of them is that great CEOs, great leaders of great companies, they face the tough problems. They don't deny them. And there's many ways to deny. You blame someone else for the problem. You imagine the problem will disappear somehow. And I think what we all have to do is to face a real problem. The Jews are not going anywhere. The Palestinians are not going anywhere. They're both fueled with ideologies and narratives that are doomed to clash. And with that, accepting that reality doesn't mean we ignore the problem. It actually means that we don't escape the problem into fantasy world. It actually means we have to start facing the problem, looking the problem in the eye.
Okay, and this is where your solution, or not solution exactly, but your way of dealing with the conflict comes in. So you talk about shrinking or minimizing the conflict. What does this involve?
How much time do I have?
We are at time, but I usually abuse the time, so keep going.
Yeah.
We'll do 10 more minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions, because we started late.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask, like, when I say, what do Israelis want? Now, when I say Israelis, not the Messianic Israelis, not the utopian Israelis.
Yeah.
But Israelis that don't want to live in a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's not the bombs, right?
There's thunder and lightning outside.
In Israel, you think it's the Houthis.
No. This is the bounty from the Lord. Go ahead. Yeah.
So what we really want, we don't want to control the lives of Palestinians. We don't want to be threatened by those Palestinians. That's the catch. And we were told it's zero, it's a binary. If you sit in the territories, you'll control them, but you won't be threatened by them. If you leave, you'll be threatened by them, but you don't control them. Now, how do we break this binary, the catch of catch 67? It's not easy and it's messy. But can we dramatically increase the amount of Palestinian self-governance without shrinking the amount of Israeli security? Now, I think instead of speaking in binary categories, let's speak in quantitative categories. What's the amount of occupation today in the West Bank? When I say occupation, this is what I mean: a military regime controlling civilian population. That's what I mean. Now, many Palestinians are controlled, or aspects of their life controlled by an army that they never elected. So that's occupation. Now, okay, so how can I, so let's say, I'm making up numbers now just for the sake of how, let's say Israelis are enjoying security of a level of 80 points, and Palestinians are enjoying self-governance of a level of 20 points. If I could increase self-governance of Palestinians from 20 to 60 and security stays in 80, I think most Israelis will take that. If I increase it to 70 and stays in 80, but if it goes to 75 and it drops to 20, they won't take that. The moment of optimization. Now I know this won't bring peace. There isn't one Palestinian in the world will say, oh, in creating a vibrant, continuous, am I saying the right word correctly?
Contiguous?
Contiguous.
Yeah.
Autonomy, where in almost all aspects of our life, we govern our life, but the Israeli army comes in and out whenever it wants in order to take out terrorists. And okay, that's not a state. Yeah, it's not a state. And that's not, sure, the idea is that building a Palestinian autonomy that has enough power to govern itself, but not enough power to threaten Israel, we should do that not as a peace offer. Palestinians don't have to give up haq al-awda, the right of return. They don't have to recognize non-Muslim sovereignty on Muslim land, and over 50% Palestinians believe that is a violation of Sharia. So I'm not asking to change their identity, not to violate their religion, not to turn their backs to their refugee brothers and sisters. Because the deal—
Isn't this Oslo? Isn't what you're proposing what they tried in Oslo? It failed.
No, Oslo was an attempt to solve the conflict. Oslo was—
let's talk Turkey. Area A, B, C. You're saying more Area A? Is that what this is?
What I'm saying is Oslo was saying, okay, we'll build an autonomy, and after 5 years, we'll turn into a state. Now, the reason why the autonomy that was built is a crippled autonomy where they don't have critical mass of self-governance was because it was on its way to a state. Imagine there's a couple and it's building a mansion. And in the meantime, it's willing to live in a crummy apartment because in 5 years, they're moving into the mansion. So they didn't think about the crummy apartment.
So in your plan, what did the Palestinians get that they didn't get under Oslo?
Well, Oslo created a reality where there's over 160 autonomous islands that are not connected to each other.
You're going to build some roads.
No, so I have to do a few things. I have to try to connect these islands to each other. I have to connect them to the world, to the road. But what I'm preserving is Israel's right to go in and out of this territory.
So then the average Palestinian still feels the Israeli security presence. Whenever, he doesn't know when, but there are going to be, so that doesn't solve your problem.
It doesn't, that's the idea.
It doesn't even, but it doesn't even, it doesn't even shrink the conflict.
No, well, depends what shrinking the conflict is.
Yeah.
If it's about, it's about, can you see,
because when I read the book, it sounded like you were saying there's a way for Israel to maintain a presence in the West Bank, but for the Palestinians never to feel it.
No, I would say to feel it less. I want to speak it's not a binary. It's not either they feel it or they don't feel it.
Yeah.
I want to create a reality where Palestinians can go from Hebron in the south to Jenin in the north, and not bump into Israeli checkpost because the entire way the road he's on is a Palestinian road. Yeah. I want to create a possibility where when they import and export goods, they don't, Israel doesn't collect the tax and then give it back to them if they behave nicely. They need to be independent economically. Yeah. They have to find, what if there's an airport next to Ramallah or in the Jordan Valley, and the airport, the security is done by Israel, but the bureaucracy by Palestinians. It's the Yasser Arafat, whatever, the Salam Fayyad airport.
When all the guys who are manning the TSA counters are Israelis.
So here's the thing. We're a messy, imperfect world, and It's messy, imperfect world. And the question is, what's the lens that through we're watching this world?
Yeah.
If you're searching, my idea is I'm not searching for more justice. I'm searching for less suffering. Now, when we try to create a world of justice, justice depends on the narrative that you live in. Zionists have a narrative. The way we see justice is very different than the narrative of the Palestinians. But if we search for justice, we're doomed to clash. But if we ask a different question, how do we not more justice, but less suffering?
Yeah.
And so increasing Palestinian self-governance without shrinking Israeli security is an equation that does not solve the conflict. The conflict is here to stay.
I understand. Well, in your plan, do you shrink settlements as well?
It's a big question. When it comes to...
It's not say smaller than the other.
No, it's a big question in the sense it will take me time to answer.
Yeah, okay.
Do I have to?
Do it, Katsat, yeah.
So while some Israelis believe that you build settlements on biblical land, so that itself promotes the coming of the Messiah.
Yeah.
Because you build a settled problem on biblical land, it activates biblical prophecy. Some Israelis believe that way.
Yeah.
Some Israelis say that if we uproot settlements, we'll have peace and harmony. It's a different messianic version.
No, there are people like Einat Wilf who say yes to the occupation, no to settlements. They recognize that settlements are an albatross.
My problem with uprooting settlements is not that it violates the messianic process. I don't think about the benefit of building peace. I think today uprooting settlements will tear Israel society apart and weaken Israel significantly. So I think we have to think about this is the following. I think we should, pragmatically, there's 4 types of settlements or communities on the other side of the green line. We have time to go into this?
Not really. So
I'll just say very briefly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's East Jerusalem. And from an Israeli point of view,
Yes.
East Jerusalem is
Not
Jerusalem.
settled.
Again, this is an Israeli point of view. East Jerusalem. Then you have settlement blocks.
Yeah.
Most Israelis see that's not settlements.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you have settlements outside of the settlement blocks, and then you have illegal outposts. And each one of them has to be treated differently. And what has to guide us when we think about it is what preserves Israeli security and what enables increased Palestinian self-governance. For example, illegal outposts really block the ability to build Now, it also depends which ones. It goes very. So I would say when it comes to East Jerusalem, that's Jerusalem. When it comes to settlement blocks, you could build there. When it comes to individual settlements, you could build upwards but not take more land. When it comes to illegal outposts, they shouldn't be there.
I mean, there's two thoughts, and then I really do have to open this up, even though we could talk for a couple more hours. I mean, somebody might look at your proposal to shrink the conflict and increase the level of Palestinian self-government as kind of ignoring the passage of Jabotinsky's that you offered earlier on. That, in other words, Jabotinsky says, look, it's totally racist to think that the Arabs are going to be satisfied with you because you give them good roads. And here comes Micah Goodman to say, we can give them good roads and that'll shrink the conflict.
No, but it's not shrinking hostility.
Yeah.
What it does is 2 things. From an Israeli point of view, I don't want to control their lives.
Yeah.
And if I could shrink the amount I control their lives from 80 points to 15 points, I just gained 65 points of not controlling their lives. The Palestinians just gained 65 points. The experience of occupation shrunk 65 points. What does that lead to? That's it. It has its own value.
Yeah.
Now, can Palestinians live in a narrative? This is one step towards something bigger.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. They should live in that narrative.
Yeah.
The big mistake, no, and it might be true. The big mistake of the left,
And
the big mistake of the left,
Yeah.
is it's a very patronizing approach, the 2-state solution idea. I'll tell you why. Because from a Palestinian point of view, now more than 50% Palestinians think that any sovereign power on waqf, on sacred land, the way there's many interpretations to Islam, but the way more than 50% Palestinians interpret, that itself is a violation of Sharia. So by accepting Israeli sovereignty on the western side of the Green Line, you're turning your back to Sharia. That's 1. 2, we're offering them not land for peace, we're offering them 67 for 48. We give up what we conquered in 67, you give up haq al-awda, effectively right of return, symbolically whatever, effectively right of return. And for many Palestinians, that's turning their back on 5 to 7 million Palestinians. So what the 2-state solution is offering Palestinians is, okay, you have to turn your back on your religion, turn your back on your nation, and you get to have a state. So the real deal that
they almost did it a bunch of times.
They always rejected it because the deal is turn your back on your identity to achieve liberty. I want to tell Palestinians something else. It's not liberty for identity. You don't have to transform your identity. Continue dreaming of Hak and Auda and returning to Haifa, to Yafo, and to Akko, and to Baka, and to West Jerusalem. I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. Peace should not be about redesigning someone else's narratives and dreams. That's one. I'm not asking to recognize Israel and a non-Muslim sovereign. I'm not asking to turn their back on the identity, but what they do get, and they don't get complete liberty. This does not solve the conflict.
They don't get 67, and they don't even get 48. They get
But
the
they didn't-
dream of
hey,
48.
They did.
Why do you think that's the right answer?
No, and it's not. There's no answer.
Yeah.
It's
Why
not-
do you think Palestinians
there's-
would? Why do you think that would buy you peace?
I don't think it'll buy me peace.
Oh, sorry. Why do you think that would buy
It's not
you
gonna buy me.
less conflict?
It's not going to buy.
I feel like we. So what is this?
What is this? It's if there's 60 points of occupation that do not create security.
I know, but we know that.
Those are 60 points of occupation that can be removed in Oslo.
You don't get the 60 points. The point is, it doesn't work.
So Oslo designed a crippled autonomy where effectively Palestinians living in that autonomy are not liberated from Israeli control. Through that autonomy, they're controlled by Israel. Oslo doesn't work because the autonomy that was designed in Oslo is a dysfunctioning autonomy.
I think we've gotten to the point where I'm not smart enough to understand your argument. So I think, well,
No, I wasn't clear enough to explain.
No. Let's open it up for questions. I have a few more questions that I might try to sneak in later. But we have some microphones at each end of the room. So just put up your hand, and I will call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. So just put up your hand high so I can see it. Over here.
So, Micha, thank you very much for an interesting conversation. I'd like to sort of present.
What's your name?
I'm a visiting fellow here at the Weatherhead Center. Very interesting conversation. I'd like to challenge the idea that it's a binary dilemma, and maybe to suggest that it's a trilemma that Israel is facing. Right. So we want the territory, the Jewish identity of the state, and the democracy. And gradually, what has been happening over the last 15 to 20 years, or say the last 15 years or so, well before October 7th, is that gradually in that trilemma, Israelis are giving up increasingly on democracy for the purpose of territory. And that explains sort of things like the rise of Smotrich and Ben Gvir, which happened before October 7th.
Ron, thanks.
Do you want me to take a couple of questions, or do you want to address that?
Yeah. How much time do we have for this part?
We have some time. I'll
Okay.
make time. Don't worry.
Okay,
I'll
great.
create times where it doesn't exist.
Okay,
Yes, okay.
So maybe we'll do like 3
Yeah.
at a time or whatever.
Okay, fine. We'll go here too.
Hi, Shalom, Roy Schwartz Tichon. I'm a Master of Public Policy here at the Kennedy School. I agreed with a lot of your analysis at the beginning, but I didn't understand how do you come to your conclusions after the analysis. You said we have to win the war against Hamas because otherwise the narrative doesn't work. And then you said, let's stop the war and you want the brothers, and stopping the war with the brothers is 5 years and giving Hamas immunity and them staying. And then you say that we have like some kind of a bottleneck, that we don't have enough people to fight against Iran. Do you want to send Golani to Iran? Do you want to send tanks to Iran? Like, we need one airstrike. If it's the US, we don't even need one airstrike. If it's going to be a peace deal, we don't need airstrike at all. Like, it's not the same resources for Iran and for Palestine. So can you help me understand what your thoughts were?
I think we should probably take every answer. These are tough questions.
Okay, go.
And
Yeah,
if
answer
I can
the-
continue a tiny bit, people I ascribe to similar philosophy of you, might not be you, said at the beginning of the war that like Hamas is an idea and we can't beat idea. You just described that we beat Hezbollah, which is another idea. So it's possible to beat Hamas, I guess.
I mean, Hamas now, if it's anything, it's only an idea. Anyways, go on.
So,
The question about the trilemma. Yeah.
okay, it's right. Yeah. So first, I think
Could you restate the question also? Because I didn't quite understand it. Yeah.
well, it's about we need to have security, we need to have majority, we need to have a prospering democracy, right? And now it's true that that I say, okay, how do we optimize both? Like, to control the Palestinians as least as we can without being threatened by them. It's a maximum that we can do from an Israeli perspective in the foreseeable future. By the way, I want to say something about the foreseeable future. This is a point that, worth making. The reason why I think the conflict is not solvable is just think about what needs to happen to solve the conflict. We need 3 things to happen. 1, for there to be a Palestinian leadership that enjoys the legitimacy of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people obey that leadership, or else there's no peace. 2, we need that leadership to really want to reconcile with Israel and give up right of return and everything. What are the chances we'll have a Palestinian government that enjoys the legitimacy of the Palestinian people? It's very low. And what are the chances that government want to make peace with Israel? It's also very low, and combined, statistically, it's very low. But if you have both, now you have to have Israelis overcome the anxiety of October 7th, shake off the Messianic people. So for all these things to happen, to have peace, I would say the chances are everyone, the thing is, I just mentioned 4 things, and we need all 4 things to happen simultaneously. So I'd say statistically, it's probably less than 1%, probably less than 0.1%. Okay, so that's why let's not build a strategy on something that the chances are very, very low. But my problem is that people that are always say there is no solution for the problem, their conclusion is that you ignore the problem. Now, that's not how we think about any problem. When it comes to crime, we can't solve crime. We're not ignoring it. We're trying to shrink the amount of crime. When it comes to car accidents, we can't solve it, so we don't ignore it. But now the conflict, because we're sold that it's solvable, when you say, oh, if it's not solvable, I ignore it. I think accepting the fact that it's not solvable means now we have to start having a conversation of what to do with it. Now the Third Israeli Republic needs to be a republic that's pragmatic and more. And to your question, one of the reasons why it seems like Israel is becoming less democratic is because, and this has not to do with the conversation we had till now, is because there is another illusion, is that Israel is a Jewish democracy, and these two concepts erode each other. So some people in Israel think that in order to maintain Israel as a Jewish country, we have to erode the democratic character of Israel. By the way, there are some, there are less, that think the opposite, that to maintain Israel's democracy, we have to make it less Jewish. The third Israel, but I think most Israelis agree, and this is a big conversation we have to have, is how we make Israel more democratic and more Jewish. And that's a very important conversation to have. And this is not about, by the way, and I actually believe that the more democratic we will be, the more Jewish we'll be, and vice versa. Now, regarding your tough question, you ask a few questions, I'll focus on the main one, the Churchillian move, right? My position is that this war, that this government is now trying to initiate in Gaza, I don't think we could win this war. I'll tell you why. For 3 reasons. 1, we don't have the element of surprise. 2, our hostages are under the ground. Now think about the following fact. If Hassan Assad had 5 hostages in his bunker, would he be alive today? Would Hassan Assad be alive today if he had 5 hostages in his bunker? I think so. Okay. So which means with our hostages in the ground in Gaza, our ability to really do the damage we need to do is limited. And 3, because the narrative is that this war is a war that's not, it's a growing narrative that many Israelis accept. That this war is not a war to save the hostages. This is a war, instead of saving the hostages, this is not a war that Israelis are completely united behind. And Israel doesn't know how to win wars that Israelis are not united behind. Look at Lebanon 1. So, but what happens if we bring our brothers home, stop the war in Gaza? Now, I think Hamas won't give us 1 reason, but 17 reasons to come back in. And it should be in the timing that we want. After our army rests and rebuilds, and hopefully we get more soldiers in from the right, we increase, we have to solve the Haradit, but there's things we have to do. And enjoying the element of surprise, let them come out of the tunnels. Enjoying the fact that there's no hostages there. And enjoying the fact that the people will be united out this war. So I think that's a war that so in other words, I think a hostage deal does not prevent victory. I think a hostage deal is a precondition for victory.
Okay, I'm going to take one more round of questions because we do have to end. So I'm going to start over here.
Hi, I'm Noam. I'm Jewish Israeli. I understand what you're saying about the comparison with crime, and we need to accept that there will always be some level of crime. But if my government wouldn't continuously work to reduce crime and tell me this is an important factor, and with the intention to eliminate it completely so I will feel safe, I would never want to live in this country. And I think accepting that there will always be war and that there is like medium to high chances that my boy will die in the next war would necessarily mean that I have no reason to stay in Israel or keep my heritage, like everything that connects me to Israel now. So even if I guess in any country, there are some extreme small groups that fight the government in violent means, really at the edges, but it can't be who we are and what we do, because otherwise we have no reason to stay.
Yeah, I think you said two important things. It can't be who we are and what we do. I agree with you. It can't be who we are. It must be what we do. It must be what we do. I think who we are, but the only reason why I'm saying that I think in the foreseeable future, the conflict is impossible, because I think it's the truth. I think the chances of having those four elements simultaneously being activated, I think it's possible. The chances are very slim, but maybe you evaluate the chances differently. Now, by the way, when I say the foreseeable future, what is the foreseeable future? I used to think the foreseeable future is 30 years. I can't imagine a Palestinian like Salam Fayyad, which was a Palestinian leader that actually was pragmatic and wanted to. When he ran, I think he got 1.3% of the votes.
Possibly.
Okay, 1.3%. A leader that really wanted peace, reconciliation with Israel, give up out of return, 1.3%. If one day Salam Fayyad gets 70%, and at the same time Israelis somehow overcome their maybe it's possible. The chances are less than a tenth of a percent, and but the foreseeable future, I think, and maybe this is good news or bad news, I'm not sure. It used to be, I don't know, 30 years from now. I think now the foreseeable future is like 3 years from now, because the AI factor has to change the way we see the future. And the only thing we should know about AI is that we don't know the future, which means within 3, 5, 10 years, the future will be so radically different than it is today, that not only that what we can't predict what's going to be, we also, anything we do today won't be able to influence what will be on the other side of AGI and superintelligence. So all I'm saying is,
It's a responsibility of a leader to help us imagine a different future, even if we don't know how we get there, even if the chances are low, to articulate a different reality, even if it's not possible in this coming generation, but to constantly orient us there, to give us a reason to live.
That's an excellent question. Can I just add to it or hijack it? I mean, the Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, took a very bold move, and that opened up the possibility of peace between Israel and Egypt that has lasted to this day. Your shrinking of the conflict doesn't involve any bold moves from the Israelis.
first of all, it's not an inspiring idea.
But the point is, isn't there room for an inspiring idea? So Einat Wilf, when she was here, she said, the Palestinians need to give up on the idea that they can move west, but the Jews need to give up on the idea that they can move east. And so she has this formulation: yes to the occupation, no to the settlements. You ultimately are saying yes to the occupation, yes to the settlements, and we'll find a way to make the Palestinians okay with it.
No. Palestinians will never be okay with it. They won't be okay with it. From an Israeli ego, I don't want to control them. I don't want to be threatened by them. I can't not control them at all in order not to be threatened by them. So I want to shrink the amount that I control them and to a level they can't be threatened by them. And the Palestinians don't have to give up their dreams right of return. And not me for asking them to give up their dreams. I'm saying hold on to your dreams. Hold on to your dreams. Hold on to your identity.
Yeah, I got you. I'm just trying to, sorry for hijacking that question, but I'm just trying to get you to think, what would a bold Israeli move in Micah Goodman's view look like? And I guess what Micah Goodman is saying is that there are no bold Israeli moves, because for Micah Goodman, the extremists on the Israeli side must be accommodated.
No, no, I didn't say that. I do say ripping settlements out of their place would tear, and a critical mass of it would tear Israel apart. I do say that. But you see, when we think about like what you want to call a bold move, so I think Zionism has a lot, or Israel has a lot to offer the world.
Yeah.
Israel, as a vibrant Jewish democracy, has a lot to offer. It has a vision for the world. But regarding the Palestinian conflict, if we don't want to escape the fantasy land where there will be no more hostility or no more Jews here or no more Israel here or no more Palestinians here, different fantasies that block our ability to see reality as it is and act as it is. Yes, so I think if we try to avoid that, practically, what can we do? Not a generation from now, but tomorrow morning, is to start taking steps on the ground to liberate Palestinian economy, to connect Palestinian islands to each other, to increase self-governance, to shrink occupation without hurting Israeli security. Those are things we can do. So if we can do them and we don't do them because it's not an exciting peace vision, so here's my thing. So the greatest threat to making things different on the ground is the dream of peace. So which means, let me say one last point, that the real threat to changing the status quo is the dream of peace. Because if we move things on the ground, when peace comes, peace that's not coming means freezing the status quo.
I mean, there's, ultimately, I think, our audience and viewers are going to have to judge for themselves whether, your read of empirical reality is right, and you are making two important claims. The first is that the Palestinians don't want to, never will give up on their idea of return, and that's an obstacle to peace, and that there is this, security threat that would emerge, and
that there's Islamism promoted by Qatar, which means
I got you.
And
But the response to that, sorry, and this is because I just want to, highlight the empirical disagreement. I don't want to try to adjudicate it because I think, like the conflict, this one can't be solved.
we can shrink it.
But maybe we can shrink it. But the response might be that no, in fact, Palestinians have been willing to give up on the right of the return in negotiations between Abbas and Olmert. The disagreement was about whether 5,000 Palestinians get to come back or 50,000 Palestinians get to come back to Israel proper, and that deal ultimately was not cemented because Ehud Olmert was sent off to prison. So people will have to judge for themselves.
What happened in Olmert and whatever, and the napkin, whatever. Okay, so many books were written about the napkin. But I just want to say, the peace between Israel and Palestinians is different than peace between Israel and Egypt. Peace between Israel and Egypt was a peace between the leaders, but not between the people. With the Palestinians, the only peace that could work is between the people. So if you're saying that Abu Mazen was willing maybe to give up right of return, are the Palestinian people willing to give up right of return? Are the Islamists willing to recognize non-Muslim sovereignty on Palestinian land? These are big questions. But we shouldn't use the analogy of peace with Jordan and Egypt, because this is a peace that needs to be between the people, not between the governments.
Okay, so, we are basically at time. I've taken 15 more minutes than I was allocated, and I want to thank our audience for being so patient. There was a whole set of, a whole section of your book that I really wanted to get into, which was about healing the fractured conversation in Israel, because you have some insights there that I really think we could use in the United States, where you really talk about how what you need is in Israel, but I think also in the United States, we need to adopt this idea from the Jewish tradition that says, you will be favored not if you're always right, but if you could sometimes be wrong. And so I encourage people to look at Catch 67, both for the very interesting analysis of the problem and potential solution, but also for some of your insights into how to minimize polarization. And so I do think, I just wanted to at least mention it. Okay. I want to thank Micah Goodman. Thank you for coming. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank the team of the Middle East Initiative, Julia Martin, Paige Ferreira, Josh Jessamine, Marina Lorenzini for organizing this. This is our last Middle East Dialogue of the year. I think we're ending it on a high note. And the only thing I will demand of you is that you have to come back so that we can have this argument at greater length.
I'm coming back.
All right, great. Everybody, please join me in thanking the